There was a goat, the idea of a goat, in the mind of God from all eternity. But on the sixth day of creation, God said, "Let there be the goat," and there was the goat, and God saw that it was good. And so he placed the goat in the garden under the responsibility of Adam, for the purpose of giving the goat a name. Adam looked at the goat, and the goat looked back and said, "Eh, eh, eh." And Adam thought, well, I guess I'll just call it Raise, which is kind of imitating the sound of a goat, the bleating of a goat. The way the Chinese call a cat meow. Later, the Romans would call a goat by the name of capra or caper. And all of the different kinds of goats that exist are under the general heading of caprines, the way all cats are felines, all dogs are canines, all cows are bovines, all sheep are ovines, and all goats are caprines. Goats do come in various sizes and shapes. The mountain goats are a little smaller, but very agile, and goats love to go to the highest spot. They will fight with each other for the privilege of standing on an overturned gas can. The largest goats are the antelopes of the Great Plains, which can hold their own on the highway. I was traveling on a back road between Brockway and Circle, Montana, which at that time was only paved in gravel, and my little Dodge Omni could barely hold the road at 50 miles an hour without sliding off on the gravel, which was very large. And all of a sudden I looked to the left, and I was being passed by an antelope at 50 miles an hour. Goats were among the livestock who were rescued from Egypt by Moses and the Israelites. The term cattle in the Bible actually is a generic term for livestock, and it means cows and sheep and goats, these three. Within the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the cows are mentioned 98 times, the sheep are mentioned 88 times, and the goats are mentioned 61 times. Certainly the Israelites had this full spectrum of animals in their herd, and the proportions of them may have shifted during the course of their 40 years wandering in the desert. When they left, they had good healthy cows that had eaten well in Egypt and had good water from the Nile, but they probably ate up these larger animals early in the wandering and were left with more goats than cows by the end of the 40 years, because the goats can live almost anywhere except in the deep desert where only camels can go. When they got into the Holy Land, the 12 tribes were distributed among the different geographical locations of the Holy Land according to the kinds of animals that would thrive there. Goats can thrive everywhere from top to bottom. But sheep need a little better pasturage. The farther north you go, the better the pasturage is in the Holy Land. And so sheep occupy the middle and upper realm of the country. Cattle need the best pasturage of all. It has to do with the way their teeth are shaped. The cattle can eat the grass down to a certain level. Then the sheep can eat it a little bit more, and the goats can find forage where the rest of them no longer could feed. So sheep were concentrated in the middle of the country, cows in the north of the country, and goats in the bottom of the country. The 2 tribes that were left basically herding goats with their their sole means of support, were the tribes of Simeon in the west and Reuben in the east of the Dead Sea. This does not mean that the Simeonites and the Reubenites were second-class or third-class citizens of Israel, second- or third-class tribes, because they had the lowly goat as their means of support. The goat is a perfectly honorable animal in the Bible. It is a clean animal, a kosher animal. It may be eaten along with cows and sheep. When Moses was receiving the instructions for how to set up the Passover meal, the very first Passover, the one in Egypt, the Lord told him, "You shall have a spotless animal, a male, a yearling. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats." So if you had sheep, you would eat the lamb of sheep, or if you had goats, you would eat a lamb from the goats. So the Reubenites and the Simeonites could eat goat lambs at Passover, while their cousins further north were receiving sheep lambs at their meals, and it was all perfectly kosher, perfectly in line with the instructions from the Almighty. God has put sheep and goats as equals for the purpose of providing the meal for the Passover. Goats got something of a bad reputation after 2 goats were chosen for Yom Kippur, and by lot, one of them would be sacrificed and the other one would be cast into the desert, and the high priest would confess the sins of the nation upon the scapegoat and release it into the desert. I have a couple of things to say about that. First of all, 1 goat was sacrificed and 1 goat was confessed to. Each of them foreshadows Jesus in 2 different ways. One as the sacrificial offering, the other as the one to whom sins are to be confessed. Secondly, I would like to say that it was through no fault of their own that these 2 goats were selected. Although the lot indicated which one would go towards the sacrificial altar and which one would go to the desert, they were both selected from many goats by the people, and they had to be spotless goats. You couldn't have a spotted goat sacrificed on the altar, and you didn't know which of the 2 was going to be sacrificed at the altar, so you had to send a spotless goat into the desert on Yom Kippur. I'll have more to say about these spotless sacrifices in the next video on sheep. But right now, I just want to say that just because 1 goat received the sins of the people and went out into the desert didn't mean that the goat was guilty. And actually, if we were going to look at it logically, the desert is a place where goats can survive. So the goat that was sent into the desert was being sent into a place where the goat, and only the goat, might find a means of survival. The statement of the Jewish religion in sending the scapegoat into the desert was as a symbol to the people to hone up their survival skills, to be reminded that sometimes we have to go through a desert the way Moses did, the way the scapegoat does, and we will survive through faith, as Habakkuk says. So the goat is greatly misunderstood, and just because we don't have small goats in our farmyards anymore doesn't mean that the goat isn't still part of our lives. Someone recently asked me, have you ever seen a goat? And I thought, every time I've looked at an antelope, I have seen a goat. We used to have more little goats around in the olden days, in the pioneer days, and I want to conclude with a story from Pioneer, Montana. In Brockway, Montana, which is on that road that I mentioned earlier. In Brockway, Montana, there was a high school in 1929, and on Halloween, the high school senior boys released a goat into the principal's office as a practical joke. The goat, since goats are able to eat almost anything, chose to eat the test scores. So in the annals and archives of the Educational Institution of Montana, there are no records for the year 1929 in Brockway, Montana, because the goat ate them. See you next time about sheep.